So let's start at the very beginning. Let's take a look at Shujing, Sogung in Korean, and his stay in Koryo. Why was he there in the first place? In order to do that, we have to take a look at the relationship that existed between Koryo and Song during the early 12th century, and we really have to take a look at the geopolitical situation in the Song during this period. So it will help you in order to contextualize what is happening, to have some knowledge about what Sinocentrism is and what is usually called the Hua-I distinction. So Sinocentrism is the notion that everything that matters has as its ultimate value at its core China, or the way China, and it's an idealized China, it's not a really existing China, would see things. So you see things from China and you judge things by Chinese standards. And the Hua-I distinction, which is one of the concrete manifestations of Sinocentrism. The notion that there is civilization, Chinese civilization, Hua, and then there are the people outside that civilization, I, the barbarians. And the Hua-I dichotomy or distinction is something that is very common in the Koryo dynasty, also in later periods in the Joseon dynasty. But it's in the context of the Koryo dynasty, it will discuss it now here. Now, first let's take a look at the geopolitical situation of the early 12th century. Because after almost a century of relative peace, of cultural blossoming, of the creation of some of Koryo's most wonderful cultural achievements, things took a decisive turn for the worse in the early to middle 12th century. And this has everything to do with the fact that in Northeast Asia, the Liao state finally gave in, disappeared to a certain extent, at least was driven out of Northeast Asia towards Central Asia, and its place was taken over by the Jurchen, Koryo's, as I mentioned in a different lecture, most intimate enemy and most hostile friend. So it's this group of peoples, of communities that until the early 12th century never had a state, that came together and formed a state. And it became quite quickly and very successfully the most feared military presence in East Asia. Feared in Koryo, but feared even more by the Song state. And it's at this moment that everything in terms of geopolitics changes. Koryo had a very intensive, successful, beneficial relationship with Liao after it had put a stop to the wars with Liao in the early 11th century. After that came a century of exchange, of mutual civilizational competition, but not of conflict. The Koryo ruler recognized the Liao emperor as its suzerain. Koryo entertained relations with the Song, but only on a commercial level. There were no formal diplomatic relations between Koryo and Song. Now this changed when the Liao dynasty collapsed and left Northeast Asia and went towards Central Asia, and its place was taken by the Jurchen Jin dynasty. Several things that are important here. First, Koryo found it extremely difficult to recognize the Jin as the successors of their, I guess I'm not exaggerating when I say beloved Liao dynasty, because the Jin had, well, first of all, conquered the part of the Liao and had driven them out of Northeast Asia, but most of all because the Jurchen used to be subjects of Koryo, and now they were the ones who were demanding from Koryo the respect that until then they had given only to the Liao dynasty. And this is a very traumatic period of transformation, and this is exactly going on at the moment when in 1123 the envoy or the embassy from the Song entered Koryo that would as one of the embassy members, the fourth in rank, Shujing or Sogung. So this is the illustrated account of Koryo is not just a very valuable, even if it is very problematic also, but a very valuable description of Koryo. It is also a reflection of the international geopolitical relations at that moment, because Song China, of course, was intimately connected to what was happening in Northeast Asia. It saw the demise of Liao, and it thought it could deal with the Jurchen, but it also thought that in order to do so, it needed to take care of Koryo. It needed to make sure that Koryo would not make common cause with the Jurchen, because against a joint, I guess, war effort of Koryo and the Jin, the Song China thought it probably would not stand a chance. And that's probably a very realistic evaluation of the situation. So you can understand why the Koryo, why the Song Emperor would send an embassy to Koryo precisely when this was going on, and precisely when Koryo was having a very difficult time recognizing the Jin Emperor as their legitimate suzerain. Now let's take a look at Xu Jing himself, so the person who wrote this book, the illustrated account of Koryo, and who went to Koryo as member of the embassy as the fourth ranking official. He was well known in his own country, so he came from a line of a family of very famous scholar officials. And he himself was apparently well known for his calligraphy. As far as I know, no calligraphy made by him still exists today. Well, it's 900 years ago, so it's understandable, but it is a pity. But he was known as a very famous calligrapher, and that is probably also the reason why he was chosen by the emperor, the Song Emperor, to represent the Song, the country and the state in Koryo, because he only wanted to send the best people the Song had to offer. He was in charge of the ritual for the 1123 embassy to Koryo. The embassy went to Koryo in 1123 and returned in the same year. And rituals may not sound very important, but it is in fact a reflection of everything that's going on in terms of politics. And it also has the ability to influence what is going to happen politically. So this is quite an influential position. After Xu Jing came back in 1123, and he was in his early 30s then, he wrote the Kaoli Tujing and presented it himself to the emperor in 1124. Apparently it was a success, because when Kim Bushik, at that time the most powerful official in Koryo, visited the Song in a Koryo embassy going to the Song in 1126, people recognized him because he had been described, and there was a picture of him, a drawing, in the account. So this is not a book that was written and then forgotten about. This was seen as an important writing, an important text on an important possible ally, but also potential enemy. Now, the reason why Xu Jing had to go to Koryo was because the Song state had decided that it needed to bring Koryo in on its side against the Jurchen Jin, really. The Jurchen had replaced Liao, had established their own state, the Jin state, and were much more aggressive than the Liao had been in those years. They were aggressive towards Koryo, so there was real pressure on Koryo to recognize the Jin as their suzerain, and if it wouldn't, then it would be war, at least that was the implication. But the pressure on Song China from the Jin was even worse. There was even more pressure on Song China. So policymakers, politicians in Song China thought that a Koryo-Song alliance would be a very good way to help check the advance of the Jin. And it looked like it would perhaps be plausible, because there was much interest in what the Song had to offer in Koryo. There always had been much interest in Song literary and cultural achievements. There had always been commercial relations. It was just the diplomatic political relationship that was lacking. And this embassy was supposed to do something about that. Was supposed to open the way to successful negotiations that would lead to a formal recognition by the Koryo ruler of the Song Emperor as its suzerain and not of the Jin Emperor. And had this taken place when the Liao were still the power to reckon with in Northeast Asia, then I don't think this would have had any chance. But given the fact that the Liao had been conquered partly and then had been chased out of Northeast Asia, and the Jurchen Jin had taken over, and Kodio was struggling with recognizing the Jin as the new power in Northeast Asia, I don't think that this embassy was without any hope of achieving its aims. It didn't, but it wasn't a hopeless mission at all. Because the Song Emperor Haejong realized that, he sent the best, the most suitable embassy he could put together to Kodio and didn't spare any kind of expense. The background of the Song-Kodio relationship is important here. Kodio had not recognized the Song as the Song Emperor as its suzerain for ever since the late 10th century. So the Kodio gaze had been firmly directed at the north, at the Liao. But given the collapse of the Liao and now the resurgence of the emergence of the Jin, this was something that could perhaps be changed. The Jurchen Jin had been fighting the Liao for quite some time, but they had finally founded their own state in 1115, and they would not only chase the Liao out of Northeast Asia, they would even go so far as conquering the most important parts of the Song dynasty, including its capital of Kaifeng in 1125. So this is 2 years after the Song embassy to Kodio. So you can imagine the weight, the political weight that was attached to this embassy. This was really about, this was a matter of life and death. There was existential meaning towards the whole undertaking. Only 2 years later, 1125, the Jin armies would conquer Kaifeng, the Song capital, and make captive 2 of the Song emperors, which is, to my knowledge, was unprecedented in Chinese history and never repeated again. Now, so it was clear what this embassy needed to do. It needed to redirect Kodio's gaze towards the north, because it had had a very productive relationship with Liao, and Jin was now looking to replace that and refocus it to the west or to the south. This was the terminology then to the Song. The important parts, the important keywords of this lecture, well, there are several, and they're pretty straightforward. First of all, it's the author of the Kodio Dokyong, the illustrated account of Kodio, Xu Jing. He's the person who wrote down, who had the experiences. He went to Kodio, he wrote everything down, and his gaze has determined, I think, or we all know what entered the text, and it formed the text. So the way he understood Kodio became extremely important. Another important keyword here is the notion of a travelogue. So basically a record of traveling. Well, of a trip. And there can be discussion whether this book is actually a travelogue or not, and I will go into some more detail in the next part of this lecture, because it doesn't so much record the trip itself, although it does do that to a certain extent, but it's more a description and an attempt at analysis of Kodio. So whether it's a travelogue or not, I'm not entirely sure, but it's often seen as one. Another important keyword here is, well, an embassy. This is a diplomatic group of people, of envoys, of Song envoys, going to Kodio with a very clearly defined diplomatic/political objective, to make sure that Kodio would go over to the side of the Song and recognize the Song Emperor. Against that background, the next keywords are important. The demise of Liao. So they basically disappeared from Northeast Asia and reappeared as the Western Liao in Central Asia, and the Northern Song. The Song state, or is divided basically in 2 states: a Northern and a Southern state. The Northern state is basically the Song as it was, and the Southern state is what it became after its northern part, including its capital of Kaifeng, had been conquered by the Jurchen Jin. So this is exactly the same time. 1125 is when this happened, and the book we are discussing here, was written in 1123, 1124. So this is precisely that period. As a result, the next keyword is perhaps the most important keyword of this period, the Jurchen Jin. The Jurchen communities, who had always been difficult to deal with, difficult to administer, who had always refused any kind of real lasting ties with any state at all, with Liao or with Koryo. They denied everything. They wanted basically to be able to do what they wanted to do. They had a loose confederation at the best. In the early 12th century, you see that one clan managed, the Wanyan clan manages slowly under the inspiring leadership of their chieftain, managed to unite the disparate Jurchen communities. And when they did, they created the most feared military presence in East Asia. That conquered Liao and it conquered half of Song. So Koryo was lucky to get away without a war there, perhaps. And of course, the last keyword the last concept that's important here, the Koryo relationship with Song, because this is at the basis of the book. The book would not have been written if the embassy had not been sent, and the embassy was only sent because the Song saw the importance, the necessity perhaps, of developing a formal and much better relationship with Koryo.